we get into some discussion, but I want to just share some stuff. So I am D. Scott Smith here in Oregon. I am known as the motivational listener. In fact, I am the world's foremost expert on being a motivational listener. Why? Because I created that, and that's the best way to be the best at something. Do something that no one else does. I want to do this review of the first half of 2020. A lot of us put plans into place, and so I'm gonna share my screen here, and we're going to go through and take a look at this. Take a look at 2020. There we go. So I'm calling this 2020 an unexpected year, and I'll talk about the danger, if you will, the danger of positive thinking based on some work. And I put this in the notification going out that Dr. Gabrielle Oettingen has written work, and she calls it pragmatic prospection. And so what's the difference between positive thinking and pragmatic prospection, especially as we're preparing for the next quarter and the second half of 2020. So with that, let's get into the next one. So the reason I chose this particular background, this is an image that I took in February at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in Manhattan. We were there right before everything got locked down. And I was there for the New York Toy Fair at the Javits Center. And weeks after we left, it became an infirmary for COVID cases. And so we had a great time. My wife, because she works with senior citizens, she actually did have to get tested for COVID-19, and she came back negative, considering we were in like the hotspot in the U.S. in Manhattan. So anyway, I put this as the background because I just thought it was appropriate. But let's see what happened, and really, I picked March as that inflection point. Prior to March, as I mentioned, when Alan and I were running the first virtual global tea break back in February, the coronavirus was like a fourth-page news story, and something happened in China, but most of us didn't pay much attention to it. In March, it affected everyone's life, and this became, at the time I was saying unprecedented, and unprecedented has been overused. In fact, some news organization showed the number of times that unprecedented has been used, and it's like off the chart kind of a thing. But in March, things really changed, and we came together as a world, if you will, because everybody at the same time was affected by the same incident. And so we saw some good things that came out of that. But really what changed was the future has never been known. We've never known what's going to happen tomorrow. In the late 90s, when we went through the dot-com bust, and then in 2007, 2008, 2009, when we got into and went through the Great Recession, I heard the same thing from a lot of people. And primarily it was around people who were doing investments. So they're, investing in the stock market and so forth. And they said, well, we used to know what's going to happen, and now we don't. And so I've heard the same thing multiple times. And in fact, now this is what I'm hearing based on the response to the virus. Is that we just don't know what's going to happen. Well, we've never known what the future is going to be. But what changed was our knowability of the future. So the way I look at it is to say, okay, well, if we were going to flip a coin, I don't know if it's going to be heads or tails, but it's going to be heads or tails. And so there was some knowability about that. What happened with the introduction of the response to the virus was it was as if someone threw in like blanks into our quarter. And so we didn't know if we were going to be flipping a regular quarter, if we're going to be flipping one that, in this case, this one that escaped the mint that was blank on one side, didn't get stamped, didn't get struck by the die. and so it's smooth on that side. And all of a sudden, we don't know if we're going to grab it. If we would grab a quarter and we would flip it, we would know it was going to be either heads or tails. All of a sudden, the back has changed, and now we don't know what's going to come up. So what was really introduced was greater variability in what the probabilities were. So that's what really hurt us. And when we look at pragmatic prospection, thoughts about the future begin by imagining what one wants to happen. An interesting thing about brain science in this case is that we use the same part of our brain to think about the future as we do to remember the past. And so we'll talk about this a little bit more I'll just share a little bit more about this in a moment. But what I want to look at is this came out of Harvard University, and they're showing us that this is a map by county. And so the green places are having lower numbers of cases, and the red are the highest. So you can see the place that you don't want to be right now is Arizona, in Florida, a lot of the South. And I think as we looked at the South of the U.S., many of the, they relaxed their restrictions much sooner. And I think it was like day before yesterday, Nashville announced that they were shutting down bars again for 2 weeks and putting additional restrictions back onto restaurants because they're having this resurgence in the spread of the virus. So the number of cases that are going up. And I think yesterday, Florida had a record day, 10,000 new cases in one day. So although we were flattening the curve, we're still experiencing this. So there's this map, and there's some implications in this. So the Organization for Economic Development and Cooperation and Development, as late as March of this year, we're predicting worldwide GDP to still grow. In May, they revised that number down to this 6% decline. So we're looking at over an 8% decline, swing from what was predicted. And even though they reduced it from December to in March, it's even more so now. The 6% is if we do not experience another surge and wave of the spread of the coronavirus. But if there is a resurgence, this second wave that might come out, then it's going to impact GDP even more. And so what we're looking at is this second wave. The virus doesn't do well apparently in warm, wet weather, but it does do well in cold, dry weather. And so we could have this resurgence as we come into the fall. So we don't have any control over, but these are just things to throw into that equation. So McKinsey and company came up with this chart so we can look at different industries. And this is kind of nice about the bottom. It's like the degree that particular industry is affected by this virus and what the financial risks are. So if we look here, this less affected, lower risk, the financial services, they're going to be fine. But obviously things like tourism are going to be affected, continue to be affected negatively. And educational services, and that's what Wayne's involved in, is in delivering education. Obviously, those have been severely affected, as we've seen. So, going back again, this is my image of what we need to do with when we're looking at our business. And so, in this chart, I always say we start. You start with the strategic, and you work down through tactical to operational. And what we end up doing is we spend the majority of our time, majority of our day, in the operational aspects of our business. And that's fine, right? That's obviously what we should be doing. But we spend the most of our time in our tasks. So that pyramid basically represents, from the strategic down to the operational, on any particular day, the amount of time that's devoted to do that level of work. So we spend the most time on tasks, some on projects and programs, and very little on the strategic stuff. And that's fine. That's what it should be. The inverted pyramid essentially represents the relative importance to our business of that level. And so on any particular day, if I get a task wrong, it won't sink my business. But as I move up into projects and programs and so forth, the higher level, the more I get those things wrong, the higher the level of probability is that I will sink my business, whatever that is. And so I always start with purpose. You need to have the purpose, and this is not the ethereal kind of what's my place in the cosmos. It's just really understanding what is the fundamental purpose that your business does. And we can look at say 2 restaurants. So Four Seasons is a restaurant, McDonald's is a restaurant, but they have vastly different purposes. And so once you understand what that purpose is, then everything else flows pretty quickly, and you can make decisions about what programs and projects and so forth you want to get involved in, because you understand your purpose, the mission, vision, so forth. So let's move on. And then again, this is the value wheel I created to really capture your business in one place. So there's a value that you offer. You solve someone's problem, and then it's your customer, who they are, how they purchase, where are you going to find them, and then how do you deliver that service? Who are your key partners? What are your key resources? And what are the key activities that you do every day? And what is your business model? How do you make money, and what does it cost? So I like this because it's one snapshot of your business. All right, so pragmatic prospection. One of the things that's interesting is that we spend more time thinking about the future than we do thinking about the past. And then when we do think about the past, it's in terms of how that's going to affect our future. So remember, I mentioned that we use the same part of our brain to think about the future as we do to recall the past. So the deal here is that when we're going out into this this future where we don't have this same degree of knowability, right? There's increased variability in what the options are. That's what causes concern, and we some people can get frozen, and this is what I saw early on in the pandemic when we were in the most severe stages of the lockdown of sequestration, is that a lot of people were just frozen. They just didn't do anything, and so as we think more about the future than the past, we also think about it more in terms of the near term, today, tomorrow, next week. And one of the studies that's out there says that when we can think about ourselves in terms of the near term, but when we're thinking out into the long term, 6 months, a year, and beyond, we tend to think of ourselves as the third person. So we make plans not for ourselves, but we're making plans for somebody else. And one of the tests, one of the studies that came out around this was mixing up some sort of disgusting tasting thing that involved mixing ketchup and soy sauce and some other stuff. And so when people were asked how much they needed to taste to experience how disgusting this mixture was, when they were describing how much they needed for themselves, they were talking about a little finger dab would be fine, and I'd be able to do it. When they talked about somebody else, how much would Colleen need to taste to experience this? It would be like a tablespoon. So then they ran this test, and they said, in 6 months or a year, for you to experience what this mixture would taste like, how much would you need? Well, it wasn't a little finger dab. It was like a tablespoon. And so, again, when we think about ourselves in the future, we're not thinking about ourselves. We tend to think about a third person. So these are just things that we need to look at as we're creating our plans for ourselves and for our businesses as we move out into the future time. So pragmatic perspection. So the term, this is again Dr. Ottingen's term, and she did research on this, and this is why positive thinking will hold us back, but pragmatic perspection will give us an opportunity for the future. Pragmatic is just practical. Prospection, think about retrospection, looking back; introspection, looking in; prospection is looking forward. So I'm thinking about the future in a practical sense. So here's one of the studies that they did. They took college students, because college students are the ones, usually college sophomores, but in this case they took graduates, the students that were graduating. But college students will do anything for like $5, right? So they take these students, and these particular students were getting ready to graduate and going through the Career Center and doing the job interviews and kind of lining out what's going to happen for their future. And what they did is they broke them into two groups, and they have one practice the positive thinking, and the other ones they talked to them and explained what pragmatic perspection is. So in positive thinking, it's imagine you've got that great job, so you're going through engineering or accounting or business, whatever it is, and imagine you've been hired by your dream company, and now you're in this job. You're doing interesting work, working with fun people, getting the great salary that you dream of. So that's positive thinking. And then they had the other students practice pragmatic perspection. Pragmatic perspection is thinking about the future as a set of options and possibilities, as opposed to a very defined future state. And so what they did is they said, imagine that you got this great job. You've got your degree, you've applied with your dream company, and this thing that you've been working for all these years, now you're involved in that job. What stopped you from getting that job? That's one of the key differences in positive thinking and pragmatic perspection. So it might be that, well, when I interview, I get nervous and I stumble over my words, or I forget people's names, or whatever it is, whatever those things are that might prevent you from being hired. You think about those different options, and then you come up with a plan that says, how did you overcome that? Well, since I forget people's names, I took a pad of paper, and as soon as they introduced themselves, I wrote their names down so that I was able to address the interviewers by name. Okay, so you overcame that. So the interesting thing was that the students that were practicing positive thinking, they had less interviews, they had fewer job offers, and not only that, when they followed up with them 2 years later, those students were making less money than the students that had been practicing pragmatic perspection. So this is why it's important not to just think about the future in a positive, optimistic way, but to look at a set of options and what is it that stopped you. So creating some sort of a plan around that. So, and the other thing is what they call the planning fallacy. And we cannot make too many very detailed plans. So there's this continuum between very loose and vague plans and very, very detailed plans. So the students, when they tested them, those that made very, very detailed plans did not do as well. And the students that have very vague plans did not do very well. The ones that really created a set of options and looked at how they were going to overcome those were the students that were the most successful. So that's the deal of pragmatic perspection. And so again, I look at this 6-step process, and I brought this up when we did the first quarter review. And so as we're looking and doing our plans and coming up with these alternatives, we need to set an objective. And in this case, it's whatever is going to be relative to your business. And you may do this on a set of different objectives, and you go through a discovery process. This is just gathering up the assets. What is it that you have? What are your skills? What are the tools that you have? Who are the partnerships that you have? And you're not looking for new things. You're just gathering up and taking an inventory of those items. And then you go through the observation process where you go, okay, how has it changed because of the response to the virus? What gaps do I have, and what do I need to add in there? These are the observations that you have. So you say the conclusions are, I'm weak in this skill set, so I need to take some training, or I need to improve my business around these things, or here's some different avenues that I need to take. And so you get those recommendations. What is it that you're actually going to do? And as we say, ideas without implementation are worthless. So you need to get into some sort of execution aspect of the business. And so anyway, there's me. You guys all know me. I'm going to stop the recording here.